Dr. Sprangel. She got her PhD from Iowa State University 2 years ago, and she works now as a data scientist in Hennepin County Human Services. And she's going to talk about the human side of data using data science to drive social impact.
Thank you for the introduction. So my name is Liz, and I'll be talking about human services and what I do as a data scientist in human services. So just a little bit of an outline of what the three things we're going to talk about. So the first thing I'm going to do is introduce the Department of Human Services, what services we offer, and what types of things we do. And then I'm going to talk about data science and how I view data science and my process around it, and then how data science can help human services in general. Then I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about two use cases, so two examples of the data I've used and problems I'm trying to solve using it. And then the third example, or the third thing I'm going to do is talk about my personal background, what I did when I was a graduate student, and then my day-to-day life, a week in the life, and what my tasks are. So this is going to be really high level and not very technical, and feel free to interrupt me if you have any questions or something like that didn't make any sense to you. That's all good. So yeah, let's get into it. So Hennepin County. So I work for Hennepin County, which is the county we are in right now. We service a lot of different residents, a lot of different types of residents. Last year we had 1.3 million residents who we served at the county through our programs. And then we had over 500,000 service center interactions. So this is people who come to get their driver's license or marriage certificates or using services, people who come to our center. We support a wide variety of people, including urban, suburban, and rural areas. And that's something I have to try to keep in mind. There's both urban and rural landscapes you have to account for. You can't just look at urban or something. And we have 10,000 employees who work at the county. And then I work in a sub-department of the county called Human Services. And it's basically anything that helps people live a more stable and self-sufficient life. So our goal is to improve the outcomes of safety, stability, self-sufficiency, and well-being for the residents of Hennepin County. That's such a broad strokes goal, and it really is. We cover a variety of different programs and services. So I listed some of the work that we do. First one is social programs. So we do safety net services like food supports, so SNAP or NFIP. And then we do emergency shelter for homelessness, cash assistance. And then we also do other things, so help for people who are developmentally disabled, services for seniors, services for veterans. Last year we had a functional zero for homeless veterans, so that's an example of a statistic we would create in my job. And then we do health services, protective services for children and adults, so bringing intake for child maltreatment, and there's caseworkers who go into homes and create case notes and things like that. We do child support and also medical assistance healthcare. So it's a wide variety of different types of data that I work with. Yeah, so that's the programs, and I wanted to talk a little bit about what the data looks like that I work with. So yeah, an example is in our program utilization. So for example, food stamps or cash assistance, there will be row by row data that'll have these types of features in it. It'll have a case, a name, the demographics, so person's race, ethnicity, gender, age, their address, so we can do some sort of geocoding maybe, what programs they're on, if they're on cash assistance or food stamps or long-term services, something else. What event happened? So did the recipient apply to the program? Did they receive some sort of cash assistance? What happened in the event? Maybe there's an amount associated with what happened in the dollar amount with this transaction. And then internal data, who worked with the person, who processed the things, and then like the date it happened, which could be like the month or the date, and yeah, so it's just an idea of like what the data would look like for a certain program. And part of my job is to like figure out the right level of data, like what date range we want to use. We want to use like the case or the name, if we want to aggregate like family or things like that. It gets like, there's more dimensions to it than I like thought at first. And it's kind of complicated work sometimes. Here's a different example of data. So we work with court evictions. So there's data that comes in that says this landlord is filing a eviction against this plaintiff, and then our goal is to sort of take that data, transform it into something people can look at and digest in an easier way. So this table is showing filings in purple over time, 2018 to 2024. And then of those filings, which ones ended in evictions, which is like the one slide. That's an example of the type of data. Case notes. So I mentioned like we do child and family services, and this is an example of what a case note might look like, and you don't have to read it all, but it's essentially very unstructured, written by the caseworker. They would write it right after they left the resident's home or something, explaining what happened, what services they're connected to, and things like that, like quality of the home and stuff. And so I don't talk about it in this talk, but like one thing that would be great is to try to use LLMs to like summarize these or create risk boards for individuals, like risk for domestic violence or something like that. But one of our challenges is that the data is super sensitive, so we can't just feed it anywhere and stuff like that. So we have to go through like an extensive process to get models approved before we can use them. Anyways. Another source of data we might have is like sources from outside of the county. So an obvious one is the census data that's useful for us. We know who uses our programs, but sometimes it's hard to tell who's not using our programs and like who are we not servicing. Sort of something that's hard to tell, but the census can help get at that. And then homeless management information is another source we have. This is like a graph I got, so this is like at the state level, they'll track homeless like interventions and who's accessing homeless shelters and things like that, and what types of access they're getting. That's public information. And then there's another example of household pulse surveys. This is, they'll send a survey out to families every single week, and the family will answer the survey and say like, we are experiencing these different things. And so, yeah, then that will be published, and we can use that to sort of get a sense of how the residents are doing their community without having directly on it. Yes. Okay, so. Okay, so at the county, we are really dedicated to disparity reduction. So this slide isn't one I created, it's one that's like countywide and can probably be used in almost any presentation given at the county. It says through our policies, services, and programs, we will drive disparity reduction and work to benefit people's lives in the following 7 areas. They're health, income, justice, education, employment, housing, and connectivity. And then everything I work on is tied back to trying to improve one of these domains. So if I'm working on food security, it's tied back to health. If I'm working on like, I don't know, like I'm working on a project with buses and like how connected are people, that's what the project is about. So everything ties back into these areas, and you always have to keep disparity reduction in mind. So looking at what people are being affected by this problem, and are they being affected in different ways. All right, so switching gears a little bit to data science and how I view data science. It's not necessarily comprehensive, but I think about it as using data-driven interdisciplinary techniques to extract insights and analyze outcomes. So it's kind of vague, but I think it gets at what I do, because I don't feel like I always analyze outcomes or extract insights in the same way, but I'm using data and taking things from stats or things from my domains, like health measures and stuff like that I can learn about. And just anything to try to solve the problems. And then there's this common like Venn diagram, which puts data science, the center of math, domain expertise, computer science. And I think that's generally applicable to me. I feel like I use like all three of these things all the time. They're all really important. And yeah, so that's kind of how I view data science. And then I also wanted to talk about my data science life cycle and like how I do projects at a high level. So the first thing is initial planning. So what's the ask? Sometimes it'll be like someone at the county is asking me to do something in particular, or sometimes there's a need that's a kind of vague, like reducing evictions, or predicting how many evictions it'll be. Or some people are asking for that, but there's a less defined ask there. And then we move into like what I would start doing. So first thing I do is plan. So I do that by data sourcing and trying to get the data to look the way I want it to. So what I mean by that is like, if someone comes and they want like, how many people are using food stamps at the county? I have to think, okay, which source am I gonna get? Am I gonna get people who are just like receiving this certain benefit, or there might be multiple benefits that covers what they want? And then I have to figure out what system that comes from, the multiple different system, and like then wrangle it and stuff like that. So there's just an initial planning phase there when I get data ready. Then exploratory analysis, where I'll just do really basic, like how many people are on the program, looking at the different features and maybe how they're correlated or something. And then modeling and testing. So if you wanted to do something like create risk scores, this would be the phase where you do your initial modeling, and you want to get like results quickly to try to see how it's doing at an initial stage. And then evaluation, how good did the model do? And also, like, this is where the disparity part really comes in, where you have to check, like, how did it do for different groups? And what does it mean to be an equitable model? That's like a question you have to ask for every problem. It might mean something different. And then you keep doing this over and over, and you want to also include the like person who's asking you to solve the problem every time you go around to make sure you're hitting the mark or not. And then maybe you can move to deployment. But it's a very iterative and collaborative process. Like, you always want to be tying in the decision makers. Make sure you're trying to answer the right question. All right. So how can data science help human services? Well, there's lots of different ways, and maybe you thought of some already of how it could help with the different types of data. But in general, it can help with enabling evidence-based decision making. So a lot of what I do is like aggregating data or finding different insights and then sending them up the line to like people who are actually making decisions at the county. They can use this data to make these decisions, which I know it's obvious, but like that's the main part of what we do. We enable evidence making. And then we can also enhance our different services and programs specifically for vulnerable populations. We can use data science to help identify people at risk or find disparities in different programs. Finally, we can use it to improve accountability. So as like a government entity, we want to have some level of accountability and be able to share our results. But since it's sensitive data, we can't just share it out raw, so we have to use some sort of data manipulation to make it shareable to the community to help improve accountability. Okay, so that was kind of a whirlwind. I'm going to move into some specific use cases and pictures. Okay, so I wanted to talk about two different like examples of data and how we use data science in our work. The first one is going to be, what does exploratory analysis look like the plan after planning, but like before you're doing any sort of advanced modeling, like what does that mean for me in my work? For the example of food security. So yeah, so a food, like there was a group created to help like analyze food security in the county, and they came to our department and said, we need some sort of presentation to look at to figure out like what's going on, like they needed us to create that, so that's was the ask. Okay. So this is the first table that, or an example of one of the tables we created, that's sort of the first step. So we found source some data, which is the survey that asks families how secure they feel in their food. They answered it every week, and this is the percentage of people reporting sometimes not enough to eat or often not enough to eat in the last 7 days. So like the higher the points, the more insecure people are feeling overall about their food status. And we wanted to potentially get at what's driving food insecurity, what factors like dairy and things like that. So this is sort of first tab is looking at what percentage of people feel like they're insecure. And then using like similar graphs, we brought in some like other features that might explain it. So this one on the left is we brought in currently employed or not, where the like pink or red dots are no, not currently employed, and the teal dots are yes, currently employed. And you might be able to gather from a picture like this, in general, people who are not employed feel less secure in their food status. And I wasn't necessarily drawing insight, but I was just making this and maybe suggesting some initial insights. And then on the right, it's similar, but we just introduced the variable of income, where the blue line on top is the people who have less than $25,000 per year, et cetera. So you can try to draw insights based on that. And then also for this report, we wanted to get at maybe some geographical details. So this is an example of how we might map things. So this map shows Hennepin County and the different cities in Hennepin County. And I believe it's broken down by county tract. Yeah, so these are the different county tracts that you would find in the census. And yeah, this picture is showing what percentage of people are using SNAP out of the people eligible for SNAP, essentially. So the blue areas are areas where lots of people who are eligible for SNAP are actually using our program. And red areas like Independence and Rogers are examples of places where people aren't using our programs as much as they could be. So this might suggest that like we could do better in rural areas potentially. I think those are rural areas. Yeah, and maybe the inner city, we have more people utilizing programs. And I think this area might be like where we are now, like students who don't use the program, but don't receive a lot of income. Okay. So after we did like all those initial assessments, I talked about how we always bring in disparity every time we do anything. And so this is an example of how we would do it for this project, where I created a table that has different race groups on the x-axis, and then on the y-axis we have the percentage of people utilizing our SNAP. Yeah, and then we also wanted to have like a benchmark kind of, or something similar to a benchmark, which in this case we have these red lines. And they show the percentage of people eligible, so the percentage of people who are under the poverty line. And so you could draw insights from this potentially, for example, like the Hispanic category, it's about 50% utilization out of 100%. Yeah, so those were some examples of like the exploratory analysis, but in general, there's always this phase of sourcing the data, figuring out what the relevant features were and things like that. Narrowing it down to the relevant cases, so figuring out I needed to only have people who are under the poverty line, for example. And then looking at disparity measures, you would disaggregate by your sensitive groups and see how you're doing and try to create a baseline kind of. And then trying to explain this to decision makers. So I created a PowerPoint, I could hand it off and try to explain it and have questions that come back. And where the repeat comes in. So either they'll come and say, you have a different question and we want you to tweak it and do, change the PowerPoint again, or we want you to do it again in 1 year, and then we'll be able to compare the results. So shifting gears, I'm going to talk about another example or use case. So this one is around inferring race and ethnicity. So this one's a project that, so the first one was like someone asked me to do it, and it was like, like a ticket request basically. And this is one where we found a place in the county where we aren't doing good that great, and we can maybe do better. And we, as data scientists, did like a proof of concept, and maybe they'll implement it in a project later. So this graphic was like a slide without the red columns. But this was a slide that they had at a countywide budget meeting where they were talking to the people making budgeting decisions, and they were talking about the residents we serve. And they showed this graphic that says like who we're serving broken down by different races. And the potentially negative part about this graphic is we have to admit that we don't know the race of 26% of the people using our programs. So, yeah, this is people who are using our programs, and for whatever reason, the program they're in doesn't record their race or ethnicity. Yeah, and then we might want to wonder why or who we're not servicing. And so that's where we get into the idea of filling in this data to try to gather insights. So, yeah, so I wanted to test this package, which is going to fill in missing race data. And so I wanted to test it. So I created a data set of things that I knew, of people who I knew their race. So I had the features of their last name or surname, and then what census tract they were in, and what race they are. And this is like a breakdown of the different race categories we had. You can notice that like there's 57,000 Black individuals, and then 24,000 white, and 7,000 of other Hispanic and Asian. And this is like, I'm pointing that out because this isn't the same distribution as with the overall population. It's kind of like affect our model later. But yeah, so my first like idea was what would happen if we just randomly like guessed, just so we have a benchmark to compare to in the future. So I did that, and this is the result. So this is a confusion matrix, which is telling us on the x-axis the truth for an individual, and on like the y-axis how a random model would predict a person to be. So like this box would be people who are actually white, we predicted other, for example. Yeah, and then I looked at the accuracy overall, and this is about 30% accurate, not very accurate, which makes sense because we're just randomly guessing. And then I looked at accuracy by race, and it's like pretty bad. And then except for Black gets 55%, but that's because we had like majority of Black individuals putting the test. Okay. So we can surely do better than random here, right? So we have an idea for a more advanced technique to do this, and it's called surname geocoding. So it takes the last name of someone, their address, shoves it into a Bayesian group surname geocoding algorithm, and it outputs a racial and ethnic probability. I implemented this in R using the Who Are You package. I think there's a similar package. And here's like an example of an outputted distribution where you can interpret this as like this person has a 17% chance of being white, 12% Black, 57% Hispanic, 6% Asian, 7% other. And you can either like leave it as a distribution, or sometimes you'll pick like the highest probability, or do some sort of thresholding. But yeah. Yeah.
So how that would it perform if you compare to specific like the rural area versus like see, like, if you drop that algorithm to see, let's just go to rural area, which one go there.
If you apply it to what?
So let's say you can have a rural area and see.
Oh,
So,
that's
yeah.
a good question, like, seeing the rural versus city.
Yeah, okay.
That's a good question. I haven't looked at the differences between how it performs in the rural tract versus the city tract. But my inclination would be, it would be more accurate in city tracts because it has more data per tract to work with. But that would be a really interesting question, especially because we're curious how we perform for rural population groups.
Thank you.
Yeah, and this is the outcome of the surname geocoding. So overall accuracy was 64%. This is just like, I didn't do anything special. I just did the basic, like out of the box package. And so overall accuracy was 64%, which was better than doing it randomly, which is a good sign. And then I broke it down by race to see how we perform for different populations. It does pretty good for white, Asian, and Hispanic, but for the Black population, it only did 50% accurate, which is basically as good as random because it's 55%. So, this could obviously be improved and it wouldn't be like recommended to use it as is in any like production. And yeah, I brought this problem to this talk because it's kind of one that like is interesting because it involves me like talking about ethics and how we would use this in my work. And so I brought with you these are some principles I found. So part of my job is like reading about these things and figuring out when it's okay to do these things or not because it's human services. And so yeah, these are some principles. So you refuse to perform this type of thing, it's not justified. So as an analyst, someone asks you to do this, you would say no if you felt like it was going to be used for something harmful. Next is to incorporate domain knowledge wherever possible. You want this type of thing to be specific to your problem as much as it can be. And then the biggest one is only use this type of thing for aggregate measures, so overall trends and insights. But we're never going to use this type of thing for individual decisions, like we're going to assign a race to a person and have that affect everything. Just for like those overall pictures where we're wondering who are we not servicing. Yeah. So that's sort of how far I'm going to go into like use cases and stuff. Then I'm going to switch to like my background in every day. So if anyone have any questions? Yeah.
The model you used for the geocoding, was it something that like they had already trained it on like a large amount of data, or like did you retrain it on the Hennepin County data?
It was trained on census data. So it wasn't trained on Hennepin County data, and like a way we would want to make it better is by using like knowing more about Hennepin County, because we know, for example, what the distribution of our residents look like. And it's different than the census, which is what the model is based off of.
So for people in interracial marriages who have adopted a surname, do you find that there is a large percentage, particularly women who adopted a husband's surname, and do you think that there is like a large bias or classification error? Or potential risk in that situation?
Yeah, in my longer one, I have a point of certain last names change and also don't always reflect their race, like when you said marriages or adoption, things like that. And also there's a problem of not all surnames are in the census. So when I ran this on my data, it missed 10% of the population. Like their names weren't in the census. So yeah, there are a lot of like problems with that.
Do you feel like it's easy for you to sort of feel like somebody wanted you to do something like this and you can go back to them and say, I tried this and no, I don't think this. It's not good enough, because I would imagine that a lot, if not the majority of jobs in general, if somebody tells you what they want you to do in the past, you can't go back to them easily and say, no, you can't do that, like, no, Facebook, you can't run this ad that like targets mentally ill people. You just have to do it or you lose your job. Do you feel like where you work in Hennepin County, there's actually like the structural space?
Definitely. Yeah, I would say definitely. I think a lot of what I do is like around like trying to make things more ethical and more transparent. And like there's one project, I was talking about it over lunch about like people ask questions and we were trying to combine similar questions or something like that. And we had to go back to them and say that we could maybe do it, but would take a lot more effort than it's worth doing, because you probably won't use this. And so like, there are some times when we do the work and we come back and we say, this isn't really feasible or helpful, or in this case, if someone asked us to do, like, raise at an individual level, we would say no. Yeah, and there's definitely. Any other questions? Yeah.
So do you have worry about like this model being misused in the future? Like if you just have this model and sitting on a computer and 20 years from now, 30 years from now, and some dictatorial autocrat comes in and finds this algorithm that classifies people's races, like you see potential for dramatic misuse.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know. The package is out there and already exists, like, and is used in, like the health field already. So I think like there is potential and maybe it is being misused already, but, yeah. Yeah, I think I wouldn't want to build something that, feels like powerful and about to someone, for a reason I don't know. Yeah.
So I really like your work on food security. So do you guys have a metric like which can measure how decent the resources process that people want?
We don't, but we do like track where our food resources are. And maybe we could create one for the like, area of connectivity. We did create a metric for like how far people are from the closest, cancer station. So yeah, that would be a good measure, how far they can measure. Because we do, like have a similar map where we just put all of the, just to see how it compares to the people where you. I think that would be great. All right. Okay. Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about my background in education and also like day-to-day tasks that I do. Yeah, so I have my Bachelor in Arts in math from Western Michigan University, where I really liked graph theory. And then I got my PhD in math from Iowa State 3 years ago, and my area was in extreme graph theory. And this is a picture of me presenting my AWM poster to the president of AWM. Ruth House. My technical interests were graph theory, like HTML and Ramsey, coloring paper graphs, combinatorics, algebra, probabilistic things, discrete optimization, game theory. This is a picture that was from my dissertation slides or defense slides. So you could tell I was just drawing graphs and coloring them. And then my coding expertise, like before I started my job, this is like the extent of it. I did some Sage math, like, which is essentially Python, is something that discrete mathematicians use to do things with graphs, basically. I use that for some basic computations and stuff. Then I used some Python. I did like an internship where I did some network work using Network X package. And then I also knew some R, which I learned at like the IMA boot camp. That was like my extent of knowledge. I had 3 weeks of R experience, but I did have a full project, so a forecasting project where I had visuals, predictions, evaluation, and like business knowledge. I could explain the business behind it. So R was like the one that I had the least amount of experience in, but my project was more like full, so it was the one I talked about when I was doing my interviews and stuff like that. And I put that I was intermediate in Python and R on my resume, but I still feel like I'm like just an advanced beginner in both, so. I don't know what you're supposed to put on your resume. Equity work, I just wanted to throw this in there. Data equity or like disparity reduction is such a huge part of my job right now. And it was a huge part of my job when I was a student as well. I love doing stuff like it. So I worked with AWM. I like doing summer, like college or pre-college programs. And I also liked doing math workshops in the community. I did things at the library and at the like local schools and stuff like that. And at the time it felt like it wasn't real work and I was like spending a lot of time doing it anyways. And it also, this type of work wasn't brought up in most of my interviews, like it didn't come up, but it did come up in the interview for the county and I got to talk on it and I think it like helped me because I'm very passionate about it. And then, yeah, my experience with data science. Yeah, so I was into like pure math until the end of my fourth year. I think I wanted to do academics, academia. And then I kind of switched mindsets, realized I could be happy doing other things too, and was sort of learning about them. That's when I went to the IMA Math Industry Bootcamp here, which I'm sure you guys know about. Yeah, there's another one going in the summer, and I might be hosting one of the projects, so it'd be really cool to see some of you there and you can help me do better at my projects. And what did I do while I was there? Well, I sat on Zoom, so that's me at the top. And we created a data science project. And like I said, it covered most of like the data science lifecycle where we did modeling, evaluation, presenting, stuff like that. I felt like that was really important and helpful. And I also learned about like domain knowledge and like how important it is to talk about the business use case whenever you're talking about some data science project. And this slide is like one of the slides that we had. It's like not important what it is, but on the left we have like information about the lettuce market, and on the right it improved our model. So it was like the place where I learned that domain knowledge can actually improve your math. That I thought that was really cool. And I also expanded my network of people. The other work I did, sort of data science oriented, was I was an intern at the Pacific Northwest National Lab. And there's no current application open, but there is like someone you can contact, data information development, and hire and stuff. And that would be a great idea if you're interested in national network. It's really fun. And what did I do there? They had like a team that was pretty diverse, I feel like, in what they did. Like there's computer scientists, mathematicians, and things like that. And they were covering things related to graph theory. And I felt like I was in my wheelhouse because that was sort of what my major was in. So I helped them develop terminology and for the first part of my work. So they were like working on how they were going to define hypergraphs in some cybersecurity sense, and I got to help them find things. And then I also did a small project where I helped them write like a Python function, just merging two graphs basically. But it was cool to work on like, a function and then they put it into their internal package. So it was really like cool to feel like I could do it in that way, even if it wasn't like super complicated. And now my current role. So I'm a data scientist at Hennepin County, and our team has like 30-ish people on it, and we have about 20 of them are like data analysts who support a certain area. So like they'll support just child and family services and only work on data from that. And then about 3 of us are data scientists, where we look at all different areas and try to do data science projects around it. And then there's some special people like data translators and people who do accountability reporting and stuff on our team. Yeah, so it's kind of small, I feel like, for a data science. Like, there's just 3 of us kind of collaborating on it and trying to figure out projects across all those different areas, like food stamps, evictions, homelessness prediction, all these different things. So, yeah, but I really enjoy it because I get to help drive what we do and people we do and stuff like that.
But yeah, a week in my life. So
I picked a screen grab of my team's calendar for the week, just to sort of give you an idea of what it looks like. So this was in January on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I had the day off, so that was good. I didn't do any work that day. And then on Monday or Tuesday, I had just a reminder. I have to wake up on Tuesday, press play on one of my scripts and make sure it runs. That's how like the addiction data is. Yeah, I mean pressing play on that on Tuesday mornings. And then I had unstructured free time until 2 when I had like a group of 4 of us, like a work group where we've been testing disparity measures and see which one we're going to use to like test across different domains to try to see how we can compare how different areas are doing. And then we had a reading club. So this is like we're reading the stats book together, taking turns presenting. And then on Wednesday, I had an in-person day. Yeah, so I usually work from home, which is nice. I'm at home all day. But Wednesday was fun because I got to do an in-person day, and like the big event of the week was meeting with another department. So we met with the IT department, and their job is to like get the data together, and we're moving to the cloud basically. So they're like figuring that out. I didn't know what was going on. And then, but I gave a 10-minute slide presentation about my like inferring race project. So sort of an information sharing session. And Thursday I didn't have any meetings. And then Friday I had the meeting with the boss, which is essentially the same as like advisory meetings, where I'll check in on all my projects and get advice on what to do next. And we share about what we learned in the week and share like what seminars we went to and stuff like that. So there's a lot of like free time or unstructured time. That's where I do like my analysis and stuff.
So here's some of the typical tasks. I was just thinking about
What I do in free time. First one is maybe write or edit code. All of the sort of things, fully writing, modeling, evaluating. A lot of the times I'm given like my boss's old script from a few years ago, and he'll say, you try to get this run again or something like that, and I have to update it, or I have to come up with a new script to do something. Another task is reading about the methods, like the principles for inferring race and ethnicity. I had to read about what are people doing and why and what are the principles around it. Or reading about what other counties are doing. So like in LA, they have, actually the whole state of California has a good homeless prediction project. So we go to their meetings and every year they like update it and say what their new methods are. We'll go there and see what they're doing and try to figure out the best methods. Then project planning, I think about what we should work on or what tools we're using. So we're switching up what programs we're using. I have to help decide what we do. Finding data, figuring out what the right data is, collabing with other departments. I'd say at least once a week, there's a meeting where we meet with there's a public health department, for example, we meet with them, see what they're doing, see if we're doing the same things so we can not duplicate work, and find common problems and stuff like that. And then yeah, troubleshooting, that's probably the main thing I do is like open a screen and it just isn't working for some reason, I have to troubleshoot it. And then disparity reduction and sensitivity, learning about data privacy and disparity measures and things like that.
Right.
You're almost through it. I wanted to talk about some of the unique challenges that I think might be more unique to my position versus a data scientist at a different type of position, like marketing or something. One is I'm working with really highly sensitive data sometimes, so things related to domestic violence, homelessness, childcare, super sensitive. We have to be careful with where we share things and how we aggregate things. Then I also have to ensure fairness through disparity reduction, so that's something that comes up in every step of my project, like planning and evaluation and things. It's disparity reduction. Next is transparency. So this is like when Clara said that we can go back to people and say that things aren't working. Yeah, we can do that. So we have to be honest about our limitations and what sources we have and what is available to us. And also like responsible AI use. like I said, we have to get approval before we can use LLMs or before we can upload any county data and things like that. But we have to know where it's going.
And then the parts that I find
Rewarding are, I get to support vulnerable populations. There's not a lot of jobs who can do that in data science that I know of. And I like that I get to make an impact on countywide decision making. So the like slides I put together for food security got sent to the food security work group and now they're making decisions. So that's like cool to make a difference in that way. I get to live around the people my work affects. So like when I go to the grocery store, I walk around, I think like my work is affecting these people and I make a difference in the community, even if it's not super direct. And I like that there's a push for disparity reduction. Like I said, equity work has always been important to me, and I love that disparity reduction is like at the forefront of the whole county, not just like something that we do on the side. It's like always there, something everybody cares about.
And then my final takeaways for you.
Our data science is a powerful tool for improving human services and still learning about all the different ways we can do it and what's available. Ethical and responsible data use is critical. I think I hammered this in, but there's so many ethical considerations to be had with my work. And, it can be challenging, but it's rewarding. And having a data life science project was helpful for my like interviewing and getting the job. So I really liked that, like our project I did with the IMA boot camp, because it was something I could always speak to in the interviews as something that was a full data science project, basically.
Yeah, I think that is everything. So thank you so much for listening. Yeah.
On your slide about, challenges working with sensitive data, is that something that, like, I can see why the examples you said are sensitive. Are you affected by like state law, or is it more like policy internal to your office, or is it like stuff that's like federal law? Just, or is it just kind of like common sense of like, oh yeah, it seems like domestic violence data wouldn't be widely shared?
I don't know. I think that there is probably some laws around it, but I usually, eventually I can't share anything that has anyone's like name in it or social security number or anything like that. So it's sort of like, yeah, always ensuring that it's aggregate country. And there might be specific things like, there's some concern about like with the map data not showing counties or tracts that have very few people in them because we could identify people in it. So there, I think there is a certain number of like how many people per like, category per tract or whatever they show. But yeah, I think a lot of that falls on our shoulders. We don't have exact. Yeah.
Sometimes you can go for the pieces of the data and still review some kind of information. So, do you have any strategies to do with?
Yeah, I think that's sort of what we're getting at, where we just want to try to avoid those situations where the staff gets so small that you could identify people. But
Trying to some professional privacy.
we haven't done anything like that I know of, but do you know, are there methods that would be helpful? Like maybe actually.
Right. Like, you kind of add some noise to the data, so it's. Sometimes. That's what.
We might have done that before. I don't know. I know we've talked about it. I didn't know.
You talked about surveys about the food security, and I was curious, like, how is the surveys, distributed and how are they collected?
It's a good question. I don't know the details, but who is involved in the surveys or how it's collected. I don't know, but I know that it's done by this place called House.
And also, I know a little bit about the health data, where you have to be identified and all those stuff. And there are a lot of things that those, so is there any health data that Hennepin County works with?
Yeah, there's a public health, department, and I don't know exactly what data they have, but they do things around like, HIV and AIDS, measles outbreak, and COVID response, and like death data and things like that. So, yeah, there's a public health team.
So going back to your, second comment there, you said you just like to press play and let people run. So
Yeah,
are you running this on your own computer, or are you running this at, kind of trying to follow up with, kind of computation resources?
yeah, yeah, so I have like a laptop and I log into, like a virtual space that's, posted somewhere downtown, I think, or somewhere else. And I don't know what kind of resources they have. But it's always been enough for me to do my work. You don't have to do data. So we brush the data and.
Do you always have to work from home, or can you like leave the house and use public?
Yeah, I can do it in public as well. Yeah, I just have to make sure my screen's not facing outward, basically. But yeah, because we log into like a virtual space, I'm never downloading data onto my laptop that's sensitive. It's always on like the county's laptop, basically. Yeah.
So, fairness. So what's the discipline that they're using? Fairness?
Like there's different measures we can do. There's like different index for disparity. Disparity where they can take, rates from different groups and see how the outcomes compare, and the closer the number is to zero, the more equitable it will be. And there's different, measures related to it, but they're not like statistical methods. It's just like,
But we try to optimize things so that we have there. We don't do any kind of.
Not- we haven't done much with that. It's usually just finding the insight, but that would be a great feature. Especially with like our homelessness prediction project is one that I'm currently working on. I think, with their trying to improve the models, but, yeah.
So I would assume that you do a lot with like class imbalance and then things like that. So like what, strategies do you have for mitigating that and analyzing models?
We sometimes try to do like different sampling, things like oversampling, and yeah, just seeing what works, but yeah, I would like, the homeless prediction problem is one where it's challenging because only like less than 1% of the population experiencing people there. So that's one where we have to do some oversampling, but, we're still working on it. Yeah, that is a problem we're on too.
I have a very specific random question, I'm sorry. From one of your first slides where you have the eviction data, there was like a huge drop in like 2020.
Yeah.
Obviously, that was COVID. There was another big drop at the beginning, or sometime in 2024, I think. You happen to know it.
I don't know.
I'm curious. This is a really random.
Yeah, the drop in 2020 was because there was a pause on evictions, so no one was allowed to evict people.
It's a big spike up.
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Looks like it's right at the beginning of the year though, so maybe there was something related to that. No, yours a good question.
Almost like from oranges and vine or
That's like
Yeah.
that is
Yeah, that's why we're working on it, because we would like to. But the actual eviction rate hasn't gone up.
Oh, yeah, the landlords are getting more aggressive, but the courts are not
Mhm.
responding. That's what I'm saying.
Like, do you think if you smooth the purple curve more, that would look almost somewhat more linear?
Well, it's already smooth by month. So smoothing it more might. Maybe, but
Do you think we will do the inflation because of food price or?
maybe, I don't know, but.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we can,
You can,
Yeah, thank you so much.